Okay, we won't spread it loud. We won't spread it very far. We'll just, just we'll just have it in, we'll start a link in a Google Doc and that'll be that.
Yeah, right, okay. Right, okay. So I'm going to basically try, I'm just going to go through a tool that I wrote, right, called the Conversations tool, yeah. And this tool is representative of, a standard Sakai tool layout, right, the way we lay the code out. So hopefully, you'll glean something useful from this, yeah. So here we are. So start at the top level. Yeah? So everybody's seeing my screen. Yeah, you're seeing a shell, right? Yeah. Everybody, good stuff. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Right. So at the top level, we've got a POM file, right? So we use Maven to build Sakai code. We've used Maven as long as I can remember. I don't remember us ever not using Maven, although my memory might be a bit rusty there, right? But we use Maven to build Sakai, right? So we've got a top level POM file there. Depending on what kind of tool you're building, right, you may not have like an API. So you see these, these kind of, we've got API impler tool, right? Forget about tags. Forget about that. Ignore that. It's not really there. Yeah. You may just have tool, right? Because you can just basically write a Sakai tool which doesn't have its own services or API. It just consumes, it consumes other services from inside Sakai, right? So as you look through the source tree, you may find some, Sakai tools, right, that have just got a tool folder in them and nothing else. Or they may just have a source folder in them. In other words, it's just like a classic web app, classic Tomcat web app, right? Conversations is more representative of most of the tools in Sakai. It's got an API, it's got an implementation, it's got a DB layer, and it's got some front end code in it as well. Yeah. We use multiple, like a multi-module approach usually for build. So if we look at the POM file, you'll see at the top, I'm inheriting from something that we call master, right, in the Sakai project. So if you, I'll just kind of, if you look in the top left, so you can see my code there, right? So under Git, right, I've got Sakai checked out there, right? I'm on a branch, but we've got like it's not really a tool, it's just a POM file, right? And this POM file brings in dependencies and versions them for us, right? So master, it's just a collection of dependencies, right? So they're all declared in this big fat POM file here, right? Versions, all this kind of stuff here, right? So these are all libraries that we use in various places in Sakai, yeah, like Ignite's there, Open PDF down here, right? And these are the versions that we've kind of like pinned Sakai on for the time being, yeah. The good thing about this master POM is you can just inherit from this in your tool, yeah, and you can then bring in the dependencies you want without having to add a version, yeah, because the version is all declared in this master POM, yeah. I hope that's understandable. Yeah? I mean, it's a big POM file. You don't have to worry about it too much, right? You just, it's there. So, the first stanza that you see in your POM file, any tool's POM file, you'll see this: parent, Sakai project master, the version, and the relative path, right? That is going to do a lot of good stuff for you, right? That is going to bring in all your dependency versions that you need, right? So when you actually add your own dependencies in here, you don't have to add, okay, that's a bad example there because I'm bringing the API, but I'll show you something more useful in a second. Well, that's your top level POM file, right? As you scroll down, you've got your group ID. So this is usually, this will usually be your package name that you use in your code, right? So in all the source files for conversations, right, the kind of packages like org.sakaiproject.conversations. api.impl or whatever, yeah. So that's what you typically use. You don't have to, but that's what you typically use for your group ID, org.sakai project.conversations or org.sakai project.my tool or whatever, yeah. The artifact ID is just saying this is the base POM for this tool. This is the base POM, right? Sakai conversations base, yeah. That's it. Packaging POM. Just to make one thing clear, right? If you went off and started writing a tool, you just copy and paste this from somewhere. Do you know what I mean? You get it from another tool, yeah, and you just update it. And you know, like a word of warning there, you're better off picking a more recent tool, you know, like and getting that POM file, because like sometimes we strip stuff out of the POM files, we move stuff into the master POM and try and bring it further up in the tree. You know what I mean? Just to make these tool POMs a bit simpler. Is everybody with me so far? Are we all okay with the things I'm saying? Yeah. Can people understand my northern British accent? Is that okay?
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's me.
I'm trying to speak clearly because I know some people think I'm Irish.
Some people think
Yeah, that's super clear, I think.
So I'm trying to, like, you know, enunciate my words very clearly, right? Okay, so further down we've got this. You know, this is where things get more interesting, right? We've got the modules. Okay, so as you can see, right, we've got 3 modules in here, right? We've got API, impl, tool, right? These are the directories we've just been looking at, yeah. So we'll just kind of get out of that for a minute, right? Okay, so if I ls that again, is it all big enough as well? Is the text big enough? Can you read the text okay on my screen? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yep, cool, brilliant. Right. Okay, so I'm not gonna dive right into the conversations code, because the conversations code is pretty complicated for a you know, like a newcomer developers kind of class, which is kind of what this is, right? Sakai developers class. I'm not saying you're all new developers, you're not, I know you're not, but new Sakai developers. I'm not going to go deep into the conversations code. All I'm trying to show you here is the kind of things you'd expect to see as you just kind of like browse through the Sakai code, yeah? So if I go into API, doing ls again, all we've got in here is a POM file. So we've got another POM file, and then we've got our source tree, right? If I look at the POM file, you see this is now inheriting from that base POM, yeah? Sakai conversations base, yeah? That's the parent. You know, you don't make these POMs children of the master POM, like the last one was. You know, these are, you know, we've got this kind of graph, this inheritance graph going on, right? It's standard Maven stuff. I mean, a lot of you maybe know this already, so I'm probably just, you know, preaching to the choir type thing, right? But anyway, that's what I have to do. So I've got an artifact ID so I usually try and stick to this convention, right? So Sakai -conversations -API, Sakai -conversations -impl, right? And tool, right? That kind of thing, yeah. If you look at the dependencies, you can see there's no versions and there's no scope on these, right? So if anybody knows anything about Maven, you have something called a scope. So your scope could be test, compile, provided, there's all kinds of scopes, right? I don't need to add scopes or versions to these because, again, the master/pom.xml does this for us, right? It's already set the scope and the versions. If you put a version in here and a scope in here, that's an anti-pattern, right? In Sakai code, because what you're kind of doing then is you're dragging another version of a, you know, different version of a dependency in, right? So if you find yourself doing that, adding something to one of these files with a version on it, you should think, hang on a minute, wait, I'll go and check the master POM and I'll see if it's already in the master POM, right? If it's listed in there, then I don't need to do that. Maybe you need a library really badly, right? You need an extra library. Maybe that should go in the master POM. Maybe that should be part of what you do. You add it to Sakai's master POM, right? So it's there for every tool to use, right? I won't dwell on that anymore. So another thing to note about the way we lay out the Sakai code is some tools, the older tools, they don't use the standard Maven layout. So when I say the standard Maven layout, what we have is, I'll actually show you this in the actual. If I go into implement, right? If I go into source, right? So what you see is main and test. Yeah, this is standard Maven layout. If you went to the Maven website over at apache.org, right? If you went to the Maven part of that, it'll describe all this to you, right? This is the standard conventions-based layout of a Maven. So Maven, when it builds some Java software, some Java code, it expects this layout. Yeah. So you've got source, main, test. All your test resources and Java code goes under test. Yeah. All your main, like production code goes under main. Yeah. The reason I'm kind of highlighting this is that some Sakai tools, the older ones, don't use this standard layout. I've been in the Sakai community for a long time, but I can't exactly remember why. Maybe Maven used to have a different layout. I'm not too sure, but like Sakai code is old. A lot of it is really, really old. I mean, it's from like pre-2004, because a lot of the code in Sakai came from the schools that started the Sakai project, Michigan being one of them. Yeah. I think Michigan had this tool called Chef, right? Had this LMS called Chef. So I don't know if any of you know this, right? But Sakai is named after this Japanese TV celebrity chef, right? He's called an iron. They call these people iron chefs, right? And so Sakai was named after this guy, right? This Japanese TV personality, yeah. So Michigan had a piece of software before it called Chef, and I actually started working on Chef. I mean, I was working on stuff before Sakai was even born, right? Anyway, sorry, I'm kind of rambling on. But the code in Sakai is really old, right? A lot of the code is so old. So, when you're looking through the code base, you're going to see lots of weird and wonderful stuff in there, right? Do you know what I mean? And part of the challenge of being a Sakai developer is trying to, bring that code along into the modern world, right? That's part of the challenge that we have to deal with, right? We don't want to break everything, set fire to everything, and throw it all out of the window, right? We have to steadily mutate the stuff, right? Just improve it, remove code from Sakai and use a library instead, all that stuff, right? That's going on all the time, right? But as you look through the Sakai code base, you're going to see tools that they don't have main and test, right? They'll have like impl, source, Java, and then they'll have some test stuff under there or things like that, right? So, but if you're writing a new tool, that doesn't happen very often, people writing new tools. But if you were writing a new tool, right, we should stick to the Maven standard way now, right? So that's, you have your module like impl, you have source, main, and test under that. You try and keep your test code and all your test resources separate from your production code, right? Okay, let's go back up to the top here. So we've got API, impl, and tool. So this is the point where I'm going to talk about class loaders, right? So does everybody know what a class loader is? Do we all know what class loaders are? Right, okay, so a class loader in the Java world, in the Java virtual machine world, is it's a library that just loads classes. So it loads them from disk, it loads them into memory, they're ready to be used by other parts of the software, right? So and you can have multiple class loaders. So in Sakai, we use Tomcat, as our container, right? So Tomcat's got, by default, it's got the idea of, you've got web apps in Tomcat, and you've got libraries in Tomcat, right? So Tomcat has got effectively like two. It's got more class loaders than that, but it's got two. The two class loaders we're bothered about are, the web apps class loader and the library class loader. Sakai adds another class loader to this, right, which is the components class loader. And I'll show you this in a minute. I'll show you where this stuff sits in Tomcat. Yeah, so we'll have a tour of Tomcat folders, yeah, in a second. The reason I'm talking about this now is because the API, if we go into the API folder, and we look in the POM, right? What we're going to see in here is this thing here, right? You're seeing that, right? Properties, right? Okay. Deploy target shared, right? So what that is telling, so we have like some plugins for Maven, right? We have a Sakai plugin for Maven, which handles deploying the impler and all that stuff into the certain places of Tomcat. So we've encoded that as a Maven plugin, and the Maven plugin is told where to put stuff using these properties. Yeah, so we're saying here, deploy this to shared, right? That's Tomcat lib. Okay, Tomcat lib has a class loader, right? So this will go, this library here, this jar file, when this is built and deployed, all of the classes in this jar file will go into Tomcat's library class loader. Yeah, I'll tell you why this is important in a second. Similarly, our implers, I know this is a lot of stuff, right? I know this is a lot of stuff that I'm laying on you right now, right? It's fine. It's fine. We can talk about this some more later. It's not something that comes really quickly at all. Thinking about class loaders can be quite mind-bending in itself, right? Don't worry about it. It's a whistle-stop tour, right? So some of it will sink in, some of it will just float away in the wind, right? It's cool, no problem, yeah. So if we go into the impler and look at the POM in there, again, we've got the Sakai conversations base there as the parent, yeah. We've got a different type of packaging here, right? Packaging Sakai component, right? Sakai's Maven plugin reads this, and then it bundles this code up in a WAR file, and it deploys it into a special folder in Tomcat, right? Which I'm going to show you in a second. Okay, this is like the service implementation code, right? So this stuff gets deployed into a separate class loader, and that's where Spring picks it all up and stuff, right, and all that. But we won't get deep into that in a minute. The important thing is there's different class loaders in Sakai, and they handle different folders under Tomcat, and the class loaders are related to each other. And the reason this is important is if you write a tool, and that tool is in the normal web app, right? A normal web app, that tool can see any code that is in the library directory in Tomcat. That's how Tomcat works out of the box, right? You've got a library directory, you put all your shared jars in there, right? And then every web app you deploy to Tomcat can see all of the classes in the lib. It can find them, it can instantiate them, whatever, right? Type thing, yeah. The components folder, the class loader for that, anything that's in the components folder can also see what's in library. So there's a hierarchy, right? You've got library up here, right? You've got the library class loader underneath, right? You've got the web apps class loader, and I haven't got another hand, so I'll use my thumb, right? It's my thumb. And you've got you've got the components class loader, right? Both of those things, right? Components and web apps, they inherit from the library class loader. So the reason this is important is that if you put some code in your implementation, right, and it went into the components class loader here, yeah, the web apps class loader will not be able to see that code. It can't see it because they're alongside each other, right? Class loaders can't talk to each other that way. They just talk to their parent, right? They can get stuff from their parent and see stuff in their parent. They can't see stuff from below them, and they can't see stuff from across from them either. I know I'm laboring this point, right? But that is what these folders kind of map onto, right? API, that maps onto the top class loader, library, right? This one up here, right? Impler, that maps onto the components class loader. Yep. And tool maps onto the web apps class loader. So that's kind of why we have these modules, right? So technically they're called Maven modules, right? Well, Maven thinks of these as modules, right? So API is a module, Impler is a module, tool is a module, yeah. The reason we have those is because they map onto our Tomcat folders that we deploy to, and they map onto the class loaders that those classes get loaded into, ready for use, right, by other parts of Sakai stuff. So if I wanted other parts of Sakai to use the stuff that I'm putting into a tool, I have to put it into the API. I have to put it into Tomcat lib. It has to go there, right? Otherwise, nothing else can see it. So that's why we have this kind of structure. As I said previously, a lot of the time, people just want to write a tool, just a web app, just a standard web app. That's all they want, right? And let's see if I can find one. I'm just roster. Roster's a classic, right? Let's have a look at roster. So roster, here we go, right? There's a lot of cruft there you don't really need to think about, right? But if you look across, right, you get all the license stuff. The only module, okay, let's look at the POM, right? If you look at the POM, we've actually got two modules in here, right? So I'm lying a little bit, but we've got tool and bundle, right? So what that's basically doing is that's saying we've got a tool, right, which will be a web app, right? The roster tool, which you see, right? It has no services. Roster has no services. It's got no API. It doesn't need it because all it does is it calls the user directory service, the site service, all the other services inside Sakai, and just kind of brings that data together in a display, right? So roster doesn't need API, Impler, all that stuff, right? Let's see if I can find one that's actually just got source in it. Just bear with me. Look at that. So many tools, I was looking at one the other day. Not analytics, not that. Commons. Anyway, if I think of it, I'll dashboard. Yeah, okay, so there we go, right? So dashboard, you can go further than this. You could go into a tool folder and it will just have source there, right? It'll just say source, right? And under there will be, classic web info, all that stuff, right? The standard Tomcat web app stuff will just be under source. Don't be surprised when you see that. If you look at the POM, it'll all become clear. The POM will just inherit from the master POM in Sakai, and it'll just bring in stuff like Spring MVC or Velocity or whatever it needs to render the tool, yeah? You'll see lots of weird and wonderful things like this, but this is a good one, dashboard, right? So all we've got here is tool, yeah, because dashboard, all dashboard does is mash. It just mashes up data. That's all dashboard does. So it doesn't need an API. It doesn't need an impler. When you build the dashboard tool, nothing will be deployed into Sakai apart from the web app, the WAR file, right? Okay. So what did I say? I said we would have a look at Tomcat structure. Here we are, right? Yeah, sorry about all that kind of stuff there, you know. Core dumps and everything. Thinking about all that, right? You're not seeing that. That's me debugging things over years, you know. Right, okay, so yeah, I should have cleared that out really before this. So if you look in here, right, you will hopefully see amidst all that crap there, right, you'll see components, right? So there's a components folder, there's a lib folder, and there's a web apps folder, right? So these are the places that I'm talking about, right? So if I go into lib, you see like a stack of like, you know, Jasper and things like that, right? So you'll see a stack of like stuff that comes with Tomcat by default, but you'll also see a lot of Sakai stuff, right? So usually we prefix Sakai jars with Sakai hyphen, right? So you can see it's like, you know, Sakai message API. I've got a quick question. Can people see my cursor, right, when I'm moving it around? You see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, excellent, right? That's good. That's useful, right? Okay, so yeah, so we've got yes, we've got, you know, Sakai Plus API. There we go. There's Dr. Chuck's stuff there, right? We've got Sakai Portal API, Sakai Conversations API, right? There it is, right? So when we were in this folder here, the name is, the artifact ID is Sakai Conversations API. That's what generates that name there, right? So there's no magic going on, right? This is just kind of standard Maven stuff, this particular part of it, right? It's not even using, I don't think this even uses the Sakai plugin for this bit. It's the components part that the Sakai plugin mainly kicks in on, yeah. But as you can see, this is a library, right? This is Tomcat's library. All this stuff in here gets loaded into the lib class loader, and that's the highest, you know, user class loader, I'll say, right? Like I said, Tomcat's got other class loaders for its internal stuff, right, which we don't need to talk about. But the highest user class loader is the lib class loader, and that's where we put all our APIs, right? So these are all interfaces. These are all interfaces, yeah. So these are the interfaces that we use from other code, yeah. This is why they need to be in lib, yeah. I don't need to say anything more about that, I don't think, for the moment. So if I just go back up, if I go into components, okay. And if you look over here, we've got Sakai Conversations Impler. Now, the stuff that goes in here, this is, I mean, this directory is basically like a web app directory. You put WAR files in it. And they get deployed into it, just like in Tomcat/web apps, yeah. But it's got its own class loader, you know. That's the thing. That's the important thing to remember. It's got its own class loader, and that class loader is isolated from the web apps one. You know, a web app should use the interface, you know, to call a Sakai service. It shouldn't be going to these implementations and stuff, right? You know, that's not its job, yeah. If I look in the Conversations Impler, you'll see like something that looks very web appy, right? So you got webinf, you got, you know, library. There you go. You know, like these are the things that I put in my POM file, right? In the Conversations Impler. You know, these are the things that are in the POM file, the dependencies. So they all get bundled together by Maven. They get put in a WAR file, and then the WAR file gets deployed to components in Tomcat, right? When you deploy something to components, you have to restart Tomcat, because Spring will not auto redeploy the services. Yeah, I mean, Tomcat will redeploy the WAR file, right? The WAR file will re-expand, but we're using Spring inside Sakai for our dependency management. Yeah, Spring will not go, oh, I've just seen a new WAR file being expanded. I'll just go and load that up, right? Because we've not got round to hot redeploying dependencies. Because if you think about this service, right? This service, when Tomcat is running, right, Sakai Conversations implement may be used by 20 other tools in Sakai, right? So if we just redeploy a new version of that, Spring has to be intelligent enough, or the Sakai code has to be intelligent enough to go and find all the places where that's used and rewire the new version in. I mean, this is too much information, I don't know, but the important thing is you have to restart Tomcat. If you deploy a new service into the components area, or if you deploy a new library into the lib area, you have to restart Tomcat. If you deploy just a new tool into web apps, standard Tomcat will hot deploy it, and you're good to go, right? It's fine. But these other areas like lib and components, you have to restart your Tomcat. Just a thing to remember. I mean, I'd imagine sometimes people, they start, building tools in Sakai, and they run the Maven build, right, and they're like, cool, right, and then they go and try it, and nothing's changed, right? It's just the same. The new functionality is not there. That's because you have to restart Tomcat. Right. Just thinking, is that useful? I mean, is that a useful bit of information? So what I'd recommend people do now, having heard that, right, is just have a browse around, the Sakai code, and just have a look at some of the directories in there, and just get a feel for what I've just been talking about. Old code, places where we didn't use the standard Maven structure, source with main and test under source, that kind of thing. Yeah. Just get a feel for that, what kind of stuff is in there, and then the way things have been built in the past. I think that's all I have to talk about that particular subject. I hope that's been useful. I hope that's been useful. So further reading, right? I'd read up on Maven. Okay, I mean, the Apache documentation can be a little bit Apache. It's not bad. Yeah, it can be a bit patchy, the Apache documentation, right? But it's worth going and having a look, and just reading about POM files and stuff while looking through the Sakai source code. Yeah. Again, it'll give you an idea of where we diverge from the standard, way of building Maven stuff. You know what I mean? You can go and read about class loaders, I suppose, but I don't think you need to. I don't think you need to read about that stuff, about class loading and that. All you have to be aware of with Sakai is that we have three we have to worry about. We've got lib at the top, right? That's the parent, right? Underneath, we've got components there, and parallel with components, there's web apps, and these both are children. Think of it that way. They are children of the lib class loader, so they can see everything that's been loaded into lib. All the classes that have been loaded from all those jar files that I've just showed you, right? They're all visible to these two dudes here, right? Basically, but that's all you need to know. Restart Tomcat when you change something in lib or components. Restart Tomcat. Those are the things you need to know about that aspect. You can go and read about class loaders. Maybe a lot of people know about class loaders already because I know a lot of you are computer scientists, right? So you probably know about that stuff anyway. If you don't know about it, I wouldn't bother yourselves about it, right? Just remember the rules for the road with Sakai stuff, and learn about other more interesting stuff is my take. If you want to know something about the future of Sakai, what we hope to achieve in Sakai in the future, right, is Sakai is just a Spring Boot. It's just a jar file. That's all it is. That's our future hope, right? So like everything will be in lib, everything. Well, apart from your web apps, right? But we won't have components of lib. We'll just have lib, and everything will be in lib. And Sakai will literally just be a Spring Boot jar. That's it. That's the future hope, right?
So let me make a suggestion. This was great. And I am so thankful that we have the recording. And I think a good thing to do would be for folks to watch the recording. And that we ought to take any questions that folks have here. But what I think we should do is next week, I should give the exact same lecture that Adrian gave, right? I mean, just say it all again, right? I mean, Adrian had great outline, all kinds of things. And I sort of wanted to just be color commentating all the time because he was hitting all the high points. But instead of slowing Adrian down to a crawl by commenting on everything he said, I figure like, okay, let me try to say the exact same thing. And then you'll hear it twice. It's kind of like a professor in a GSI. Yeah, it's good to hear it twice with different words and different perspectives. So I'll do roughly the same thing next Wednesday morning, but I'll take a very different approach. But I would say I'll stop now and ask Adrian any questions you want to ask. Okay, well, don't worry, Adrian. Sometimes the best lectures have no questions. I've been a professor for a long time, and
Exactly.
after a good lecture, sometimes there are no questions.
Yeah, so
But,
just
go ahead.
Yeah, just one question about the class loader. So yeah, like Knoll has asked in the chat. So can you give a use case of the class loader in Sky?
The use case is we want a shared set of interfaces for all the tools and services in Sakai, to reuse.
Yeah.
That's the use case. So you put all of your kind of like, not public but globally available interfaces into the lib class loader, so the top level one, and then everything underneath can see all that stuff and reuse it, right? So as we start to kind of delve into how to write a basic tool, right, you'll start to see how we inject these services into our own Sakai tool that we're writing, yeah, and that'll be the use case, right? So the use case, so you only code to an interface, right? We all know that, right? We're all computer scientists, right? Or we've kind of been in that world, right? You code to the interface. If you code to the interface, it means you're not coupling your code too tightly. You can swap things out if you want, right? It's just good practice. And that's what we've embraced in Sakai, right? So all the things that are in the lib class loader, Spring loads them all up, right? And makes them available for injection into your own code just by the interface name. The code that uses that stuff has got no idea about the implementation. It's got no idea about how it's implemented. And that's why all that stuff is in the topmost class loader. So the class loaders below it can see all that stuff.
Adrian,
Got it.
is it accurate to say that we didn't invent the class loaders? Tomcat said, here's the deal, right? Tomcat said, if you put these files here, Tomcat will wake up a class loader. And then if you put your files there, Tomcat will wake up a class loader that's different than the first class loader that inherits from that first class loader. Now, the components is kind of weird because I think we kind of forced that issue a little bit, right? So we got custom code that loads the component stuff. But in general, it's not like we thought, oh, Tomcat is the hosting environment and it tells us what the rules are and how it's going to make class loaders. And then Spring gets involved as well. But to some degree, it's not like we're like, let's make a class loader and let's do this thing and do that thing. The class loaders are made for us. And all we do is based on how we deploy a jar file, right? We got 3 places to deploy jar files. One is a web app, the other is lib, and the other is components. Based on where we deploy that jar file, Tomcat is going to stick the code, make that code available in a different class loader. And one of the things that has been something that I've been pushing for is to increase the amount of code that's in shared, that's in lib. From it used to be in components or even in web apps, and it's like, get that crap out of here. And the problem is that we would do things like one of the common things we did, we have this class called formatted text, and it does things like, cleans text up that has tags in it and stuff like that. We use that all over the place. Formatted text, something.org, Sakai project, util formatted text. And it's util code. And so it's not even an API or an impl. There's a third kind of code called util code that is a self-contained jar that's kind of like a C or Python library that's just code you can load and access and import and use. So this util code tended to be little tiny jars of reusable things like convert a string to a long or something like that, something that you do all the time. That's called util code. And if you go back to Sakai many years ago, well, even 2 years ago, we would just, in a web app for the basic LTI tool, we would just put a dependency in for the text util. And then Maven would, inside the web app, put the text util jar in there. And then roster would say, I want to use text util. And then it would put text util in that web app. So you could go through all the web apps and you would find certain jar files would be like in 35 web apps, which means it's taking up a bunch of memory. It's slowing startup. It's doing all these things. And be like, that's a bad idea. Let's take those util classes and move them up into lib so that Tomcat loads one copy of them. But since the web apps class loader inherits from lib, we all can use it. And just like why was it that we did such a foolish thing for so long? And we call it the Chuck Hedrick rule, that there's this sort of sense that it's not as prevalent as it was. There was this, we go all the way back to like 2008, 2009. There were some people in Sakai that thought that there should be like 2 parts of Sakai, the kernel and then the unwashed, the not kernel people. And so the idea of putting something in shared, you were supposed to wait for the gods to put stuff in shared. So we all just put it in our web apps, and then we wasted memory. And that's not such a problem anymore. We don't have kind of like 2 kinds of software developers. If I want to put something into kernel, or Adrian wants to put something into kernel, or even if you guys want to put something into kernel, you can, right? And so I just had Chris Maurer. I said, Chris, I want you to go through and use grep and whatever and find and see how many jars are just like double, triple, quadruple. And like I said, some we'd had 30 copies of these jars in each of the web apps class loaders, and we took them out of there and put them up. And so that's the kind of thing. The class loaders are just kind of like the world in which we operate, defined by Tomcat plus Spring. And so that it's not like we're like, we make a class loader, or you're going to make a class loader. You won't be making class loaders. I won't be making class loaders. The components folder is a weird thing because that's not a standard Tomcat thing. And we have sort of forced ourselves. There's a little tiny bit of code that gets the components started that uses a combination of Spring and Tomcat's class loaders, et cetera. So component is our own invention.
Yeah, but apart from that, it's all standard stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And another thing that was sort of running around in the presentation that Adrian did had to do with like sort of hot redeploying, right? There's like, one of the reasons you have multiple class loaders and you don't put everything in the big shared class loaders is web apps can be dynamically redone. And so if you're in a tool, let's just call it the iframe tool. You're in the iframe tool and you're using formatted text. Well, formatted text is up in the lib class loader, and that lib class loader is only going to be reloaded when Tomcat reloads. But the code that is the UI for the iframe tool, that's in the iframe tools web app folder, and that can be reloaded anytime and re-hot deployed. And so I'll talk a lot. I'll give you some examples about places in the folder tree where if you recompile Sakai from here down, you got to shut Sakai down and start it back up. But if you go to here, you can compile with a Maven command from here, and Sakai will just go like, oh, tasty. Give me a couple seconds, and it works. And so that's a productivity thing. But from a class loader perspective, the class loaders are just things that are presented to us. If you're going to work in Tomcat, here are the rules, and this is what Tomcat's going to give you. And of course, we bring Spring in, so Spring brings more in. So that's my class loader answer.
Yeah, and our Maven build deals with all of that. So it's just good to be aware. It's just good to be. I mean, a classic recent example of this with the kind of stuff I've been doing is I've been moving internationalization bundles into the lib class loader, because sometimes we've got bundles of strings or internationalization bundles, right, in web apps, and then we want to use them in another tool, right? So we've had to create this service called the message bundle manager, right, to like register those bundles and store and hold them somewhere, right, so that other tools can access them. But for me, really, we should just put those bundles into the lib folder. If you bundle all of your internationalization strings into a jar file and you put them in the lib folder in Tomcat will make them available to everything in Sakai, so problem solved.
Except then you're going to not be able to hot deploy a tool when you change an internationalization string.
Yeah, it's true.
Right.
It's true. It's true. Yeah, there are consequences for all these things. There are, but I'd rather we didn't have to have something called, the message bundle manager. I mean, it's great for changing strings on the fly, right, between schools. But the concept of having to have that, I mean, so basically you have to start your web app up. You have to start your web app up before to actually register your strings with a message bundle manager. So if you deploy some new strings in a web app and you're trying to use it somewhere else in Sakai, you have to make sure a user is going to hit that tool at least once. Otherwise, the strings aren't there. The strings will not get registered with the message bundle manager. Okay, so sorry, everybody. It's probably too much information, but this is interesting. It's interesting stuff, right?
Right. I'm just thinking about this. I'm thinking about this for the first time, and I'll tell you what. In the great Chris Mauer migrate to lib to take all these utils, one of the things that couldn't migrate to lib that was greatly frustrating was the resource bundle manager, because it had to be, I couldn't take the code for resource bundle manager.
Right.
I couldn't move that up into lib because it couldn't access the properties in the web app. And so we got a whole bunch of crap that's across all the web apps. Though code for managing that is across all the web apps, right? And so this is just an example of how the class loader, the advantage of keeping it in web apps is you cannot redeploy web apps. The disadvantage is that you're making all your stuff bigger by bringing all the code for that stuff into every single web app so that it can access it. So we haven't talked about this before, Adrian, but I'm warming to the idea.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, it's but yeah, it is a classic example of you try and access a bundle, a resource bundle, right? And you don't find it. It doesn't exist. Nothing can see it, right? Because you're in a tool, you're trying to access a resource bundle, which is actually hosted in another web app parallel with that, right? So your web app cannot see that. You can see it in the source code. So you think, right, I'm going to add this to my tool, right? I'm going to load this resource bundle and I'm going to use this string. No, you can't, because it's in a parallel class loader. It's in that web apps class loader over there, right? It's not in the top where it should be. So then we have to build infrastructure. So we have this thing called the message bundle manager, right? We have to build infrastructure for dealing with this scenario. Like Dr. Chuck says, right? If you put things into lib, you have to restart Tomcat to pick up those changes. That is the downside of it. Maybe it slows your development down a little bit. I don't know, but I'm a big proponent of test-driven development. So to me, I write unit tests all the time, and I code to unit tests, and I exercise all of my code in unit tests. So when I make a change, when I deploy a change, it's usually a big change now. So I've got one Tomcat restart for like a lot of stuff that's happened because I've done all the work against unit tests. And we will talk about unit tests as part of this stuff. We will talk about unit tests.
And we're hitting 10 o'clock. We're hitting
Yeah.
10 o'clock. I'm going to stop the recording.
Yeah.